In the last session we have managing Archibus users and controlling what they can see using Virtual Private ARCHIBUS, and managing roles and processes, creating new views within Archibus Web Central using the View Definition Wizard, and then publishing them for your users. Again, we have Shivangi and Callum, two of our technical support engineers who you would have heard from earlier.
Good afternoon everyone, and welcome to our third and final webinar today. Hopefully you'll stick with us to the end and not get too bored. Today, first slide is to give you an idea of some of the concepts and subjects matter that we will actually be discussing today as we talk about creation of user roles and matching them to the craftspersons and employees before, of course, talking about how we can restrict respective or certain users and craftspersons so that they only see the data that is required for them. So, an introduction. I will be talking to you at first about the user creation, role creation, craftsperson and employee creation, linking it all together, so the users and roles, before finally talking about the craftsperson setup, which is obviously rather important when talking about user and employee roles, and linking in with the rest of the sessions today, precisely the data that's created, managed and viewed within Archibus. Finally, Shivangi here as our expert technical resource and development specialist will be talking about VPA restrictions on both the users and the roles and how they can be applied by you to your system. Obviously the first half of this talk today is going to be relatively simple and for most of you already something you're doing, but it's always worth going over again. The VPA restrictions is perhaps what most of you are actually more interested in, as it's something you've not looked at before. Bear in mind that because this webinar is as short as it is, that we will itself only be looking not to any advanced level of the VPAs. We will be giving you an overview, not exactly how to do it. So without further ado, let's start. So we want to actually get to creating user roles, creating users themselves, creating and linking this all together. So the most common way to do it, in fact the way that it's been always set up to do up to 23.1 and still within 23.1, is to follow this particular path. Using the process navigator view, in this case, go to system administration at the bottom left hand side of the toolbar. From there select the Archibus administrator, user and security, before traveling on to the specific section highlighted on the far right, security groups and roles, and the 6 views within that. Here you'll find that you've got exactly what you need to be able to set up users and the background data that manages them going forward. So, first and foremost, before you even really think about creating a user, is you actually need to have the background data that this user is going to be governed by. So that means the user roles, and the user roles being governed by the security groups within Archibus. Here, using the Add or Edit Security Groups view, you create or edit security groups as they exist. Here you can see as an example, I have created the Edge security group, which will be applied to the user role we are generating in a couple of minutes. To do this, click on Add New and enter the information as required. A group name, in this case being Edge, and group title simply being Edge. You want to save this and go onwards. Security groups are hard-coded within Archibus and the back-end information to actually govern what data editing your user roles have. So some of these are specifically generated for administration uses, or they're generated to handle things like the hazmat and risk modules, or In the case of 11 of them, they have been created purely to manage the mobile application, which is of course truly the mobile application 2.0, truly usable as of 21.3. We've now created the security group, and if you actually want to truly get into the means of customizing your backend, I would recommend that you create security groups, individual security groups for your roles each time you are generating a new role. So now that we've generated security group, it's time to generate the role. Go to the Add or Edit User Role view and select the Add New button on the top of this, where you see a list of all the roles available to you. From here we will go to the right hand side of the screen, where it will be blank beforehand, and you will create your new role. In this case, I've named the role Edge again, given it a role title of Edge. It's always best practice to keep it as simple as possible. Keep it simple, keep it relatable, so that you know exactly what steps you're following through from A through Z. You know where you want to go each time going forward, so keep it simple, keep it related. License level is, if you actually want it accessible for your users when they sign in, needs to be set to activity ACP, so that they take and use a license attached to the user, and the number of licenses you have available to you as a company, one of them will be used each time a user logs in using the role with that. There are other license levels, for example, CAD being one of them. In this case, they would not actually be able to use it to log into Web Central unless a very specific process has been attached to their user role, and they will more often than not actually be used as a license level simply to create, edit and publish your drawings from the CAD drawing into Web Central itself. That's a discussion for another time, but you can manipulate at that time. I would recommend as best practice that you actually just stick to using activity ACP as the license level. Later on, Shivangi will be discussing the role preference, the VPA restriction that can get applied to roles. Role preferences in XML is simply a set of preferences that can be set against the role using XML code to restrict the data view. But in general, the VPA restriction, which is also a mix of XML and SQL, will be used to restrict would be the preferable way to restrict data view. As I said, Shivangi will be covering this in further detail rather than me, so I shall move on from here. Now that we've created the role so that we want to assign our users to, or in this case, one user, we need to assign security groups to the role. This is so that the role within Archibus actually has a set of rules and restrictions applied to it so that they can affect the data within it and update it as needed, or in fact just leave it as is so that they only see the data. In this case, select the role thing, which will actually open up the security groups that are attached to that role. I've already added the calculated security group to the Edge role, as you can see below, but if you want to add a new security group, click on Add New. It will come up as blank, or rather it will come up with two fields. The role name will be previously filled out as Edge in this case, and then you want to select underneath that security groups that you want to apply to the role. As I've created the Edge security group beforehand, I have selected this, and it will fill out the field below, after which you want to select Save. This will then add the security group as another security group to the role. So the bottom left, what you would have is Edge Calculated showing and Edge. If you want your users within the role to be able to use the mobile application, the specific mobile, you need to add the specific mobile security groups, all of which will finish with -mob. This is an easy way to locate the security groups you are required, and then from within that, the specific security groups will allow you to add the applications within the mobile application itself. Before I move on, there is one security group that should be avoided attaching to any user outside of the AFM super user itself. This security group is the percentage security group. Now, the reason this is dangerous is because the percentage security group, much like coding terms, will actually open up everything to the user role. So using the percentage security group, you don't just have the ability to view data and, in fact, add data in the right places. You have the opportunity within other views to also add and manipulate data that you may not necessarily want manipulated. An unfortunate example of this would be within the work requests screen when you are logging that. If you have the percentage security group attached to a role that's creating a work request, when selecting room data, you can also edit that room data so that it is different, or in fact you can add new room data where none should technically exist. This can end up creating non-assigned work requests and loose data within the database that would need to be cleaned up by us after investigation to see what's happening. So in future, when creating your own roles and assigning security groups to them, do not assign the percentage security group. I cannot underline that enough. So we've now created the user role. We've assigned security groups to that user role. I think it's time that we actually move on and assign the processes and the views that allow you to interact with Archibus Web Central within Web Central itself, within the role. For that, we go to the Assign Processes to Roles or Users view. This is found, again, in logical order as a fourth view down within the group of views I told you to go to. From here, select the user role on the left-hand side. In this case, I've selected Edge as it's highlighted. And the list of available processes and activities and applications that exist for you and what you are licensed for on Archibus will become available for you to be able to assign to the user role. On the left-hand side of the available applications and processes screen, which is on the bottom half of the right-hand side, you have little checkboxes. You want to select the checkboxes that you want to assign, or the processes and applications that you want to assign to a role, which will actually highlight them, and then click Assign. These will then proceed to assign them to the role itself. In this case, I have assigned one process you can see called Client. This will allow the Building Operations Console, the Report Request console, and to view work requests reported by the client as available views to them. Though it's not shown, I will also assign to this role the Space Console so that they can view that, and when later on we are restricting data via VPA applications to the Edge role, you can see the impression it makes on those roles. So, next, now that we've actually created the roles, we've assigned the security groups, we've assigned the processes, everything's assigned to them, it is time to create the users. At last, finally get to the meat of this. Well, sort of. So here we have the list of users down the left-hand side of all the users that are available within AFM. From here, we can select the Add New User button. Select that, and you will end up with a blank set of fields on the right-hand side that defines precisely what you want about the user. The user name, the user role, the email address that is attached to that user, a navigation type, which can be either Process Navigator, Dashboard, Page Navigation if it's in version 22.1 or 21.3, or the home pages in version 23.1. locale, which is in this case set to default, which is US English, so you will end up with dollars, feet and inches, the metric system. You have the opportunity to select this to English UK, so it's using pounds, and also so that you can use meters and kilometers with the metric system, not imperial. Here, highlighted, is also the create employee option. So this is so that when you create the user, also created is an employee. This is done so that when you have space data attached to users, they will actually be attached to the employee that's attached to the user. Below that is the VPA options. Shivangi will go in more details later on, but as you can see, a brief glance, you can immediately restrict to VPAs by building and site, and then underneath that there are options 1 through 4, which we'll go into more detail later. Once you click Save and go into the next one, it will create the record and the employee record. From here you will be able to now assign a password to the user himself. Click on Change Password and the window on the left-hand side will pop up, giving you the username, obviously grayed out so that you can't change that, and the Enter New Password. Here you can also send an email to the user telling them that their password has been changed and what it has been changed to. When entering the new password, as a version 23.1 and later, it requires that you put in 8 digits minimum. However, this is the only restriction. You can make them all the same thing, all the same character, all the same numerical character or otherwise, and you can make it as simple as possible. Obviously, when we want, what we would recommend with regards to user creation is that you don't do this. You in fact make it as complex as possible. I would recommend that you use at least 2 alphabetical characters and at least 2 numerical characters. Make at least one of the alphabetical characters a uppercase letter, and also within this field you can put in such complicated characters like the ampersand, the dollar or the pound sign if you wish to do so. Once you've entered the password in the left-hand side box and click Change, it will fill out the password field, at which point you need to click Save, and it will save the user and the password that is assigned to it. Right, so now we've created the user, it is time to move on to craftsperson. It's a craftsperson creation. In this example, I've created a craftsperson called Edge2. The reason for that will become available or obvious to you in the next slide when I'm talking about what has been introduced in 23.1. However, in this case, when creating a new craftsperson, what you need to go to is go to Building Operations, go to either On Demand or Preventive Maintenance, and go to Business Process Owner. From there you can define the craftsperson. Click on Define Craftsperson View and click Add New. From here, the screen on the right will appear, which will allow you to enter in the craftsperson code, email, craftsperson name attached to the code if the craftsperson code or email and name are different, or if you actually want to keep it as simple as possible, you can actually make the craftsperson code the same as the name. Obviously, what you decide to go for depends on your business processes, but from a keeping it simple point of view, I would recommend that craftsperson code and craftsperson name actually match, as then you will know which craftsperson you are talking about rather than having to go into the individual craftsperson's record and find out. Here I have highlighted the link button. This is where, rather than just entering in the craftsperson's email, you can click on link and then deliberately link the email to either a created user or employee account. Here a search window will appear and allow you to search by the username or the employee name, depending on which one you've decided to link by, and you can bring through the email itself. Now the importance of the email, is that if you don't have an exactly the same email between user, craftsperson, and employee record, you will find that they will not match data between the three of them. So that the user, if there's even just a space character after the user email, but not after the craftsperson email, the craftsperson will not be linked to the user. So when they sign in, they will not be attached to this craftsperson record, and therefore not see the data that you want them to be able to see and work on when pushing them through your system. So with the email, unless you're creating a new craftsperson record, and from there and next page creating a new user record, you will actually want to link the craftsperson email. More on that in a bit. Underneath this is primary trade. This can be filled out from anything from IT to general use to plumber to electrician. Obviously, though the primary trades are entered within your system as you require them, again, keep this as simple as possible and keep it as obvious as possible. So if someone is an electrician, attach them to a primary trade of electrician. Beneath this, you have 4 fields that you want to actually keep to deliberately sort out. So is supervisor, is estimator, is planner, can have work assigned. Supervisor is as it sounds, whether the craftsperson is a supervisor or a general craftsperson. This is a yes, no, drop down ticks. The craftsperson is a supervisor, you want to make him yes. Estimator and planner relates to the mobile client and the Web Central client when managing and sorting out work. If they estimate time and plan and schedule time against that work request, you need estimator and planner to both be ticked as yes. This also exists within the mobile client if they are to add their times or indeed times of others multiple times to a work request. These both need to be selected as yes. And obviously you can have work assigned. If this is not ticked as yes, you cannot assign a craftsperson to a work request. Finally, status active is an important one. If the craftsperson is not active, then he or she cannot have work assigned to them. Next page is something that's new to Archibus 23.1. From the craftsperson or defines craftsperson page, you can create a user that will link automatically to the craftsperson and also to an employee record. So within here, if you tick create user, which is highlighted as shown, it will automatically link to the email that you have entered for the new craftsperson, in this case edge2@archibus.com, and the new window will show up allowing you to put in the username, the user role, whether you want to auto-create an employee, whether you want to assign a mobile to it. Once you have selected the required data for the user, and I would recommend that you always create an employee, click Save to generate the craftsperson, the user, and the employee from one screen. This is a faster, more efficient use of your time than it has been in 22.1, where you would need to go through and create the user and employee one go, and then find the craftsperson and link it to the employee and user data through the craftsperson's email. Same as when creating a user. Once you have defined the role name, which in this case is Edge, you can proceed to move forward and save the craftsperson and employee user record. It will generate a user and employee record, and you can change the password as shown before when generating a user account. In this case, click again on Change Passwords. Window will pop up allowing you to notify the user of the changed password. Enter in the password and to create the password for it. Once the password is created, save the record again, otherwise password will no longer exist. As we can see here, I can prove to you that through the define cross-person screen, I have generated the employee record called Edge2 with an email address of edge2@archibus.com and the Edge2 user role with the required roles, user himself with the required user role against them, their password and their email set up correctly. Navigation process is not created, so in this situation I have gone into the user record and changed it so that it becomes Process Navigator for ease of transport around Web Central. Now that the cross-person is generated, there's one final bit of the setup which needs to be applied. Work teams. Once the cross-person is created, you can now edit this. As we mentioned in Webinar 1, SLAs can be put against work team rather than individual cross-persons. This allows you to actually match multiple cross-persons to a set of work that is relevant to them. This is here from the cross-person screen itself when you define the cross-persons, where you decide what work teams are going to be assigned to them. In this case, I've put it against the Bedford work team and the Boston medical work team, so that all work requests that attach to those work teams that are managed through those SLAs will show up for this cross-person. Once the work requests are selected, click Save, and you will actually have your fully generated cross-person. Now that we've actually gone through the simple creation of users, employees and cross-persons, it's time for the part that I think most of you will actually be quite interested in, which is VPAs with Shivangi.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shivangi. Thanks, Callum, for showing how to create users, roles, and processes, security groups, and craftsperson setup. So, I'm going to give you the basic overview of VPA today. For advanced level, we will take forward in our next build in July. So, let's understand VPA. VPA stands for Virtual Private ARCHIBUS. Well, it is an SQL restriction attached to the current user's session. It is also a part of the Archibus data security, and it enables you to specify which raw data or non-aggregated data the user is allowed to see in forms, grids, charts, and other standard panels. Now, what does it applies for? So VPA contains metadata describing to which tables or fields it is applicable. It can also be defined on a per user basis or a per role basis, and is initialized and added to each user's profile on login. For example, for building data or for table data, so it depends upon the metadata or the tables which you are assigning to. And as we discussed with Callum, the permissions for role and user. So again, it will depend upon the permissions you have as per role and as per user. And it also established when the user signs in to the database and remains for the particular duration of the session. For example, if there are craftsperson or craftspersons working on specific sites, we can restrict a craftsperson from seeing other sites or building by assigning VPA restriction for particular site or building. This can be done while creating the user, that is the craftsperson. Similarly, if there are more than one user having similar role, then VPA restriction can be assigned to role. And all users will be restricted to view data for that particular site. So, if there are more than one craftsperson having same role, then we can assign VPA restriction against the role instead of assigning it for each user, which will save the time and which will also give the uniform data across all the craftspersons. Next, we have two types of Archibus VPA restrictions here. One, VPA restriction at user level and another one at roles level. Under user level, we can apply restriction against building or against site or against both building and site or it gives us further options, VP option 1, 2, 3, 4, to apply for other different kind of codes. So here I will show you without VP restrictions what user can view in building operations console. So here you can see in location column, user can see records for all buildings, whether it is Boston Medical or any of other research buildings, etc. But if we want to restrict a user to a particular building, then we need to apply the restriction on location, that is building or site, etc. You can also apply similar restrictions for problem type or other kind of metadata you have access to. In another slide, I will also show you for the space console. Again, in the location column, you can see the building, it's showing for all the buildings. So we can restrict the user for specific records of building or sites or floors after applying the VP restrictions. So now I'm going to show you where we assign the VP restrictions. As Callum told you, while creating or editing a user, we can apply VP restrictions. You can see at the bottom of the screen, we have VPA building code list. We can give the particular code of the building when assigning or restricting a user up to that building only. So as you can see the username AFM demo. So AFM demo, if I give the VPA building code as BOSMED, it will be restricted to this particular building data, and it will not be able to show or view the other building records. Similarly, I can restrict a user at site level while providing the site code for the particular user. Or we can provide both things, building and site code, to restrict the user for particular building and site. And another type of VPA is we can assign the VP restrictions at role level. So multiple users will be affected which have been assigned a particular role, and just by giving VP restriction in XML format in this particular screen, as you can see in bottom VP restriction, we can restrict all the users for which edge role has been assigned. This VP restriction will be in XML format. This will be basically a combination of SQL and XML. So to write it down, we need some advanced level training, and today we are just giving the overview for basic VP restrictions. Once we apply this VP restriction here, this restriction will be applied for all the users. As you can see, in VP restriction, we are giving the validating table name as BL, building, and restricting it for BOSMED building. So the edge, all the users under this role name edge will be restricted to Boston Medical Center building records. As you can see, after applying VP restrictions on building in building operation console, in the location column, you can see the user can view only the records for the particular building, and for the other building records it is not accessible for the user. Similarly, you can see in Space Console, the restriction is provided on the location, and the user can see only the records for the particular building, that is Boston Medical here. So to summarize further, I will give to Callum again.
So we're now coming to the end of our webinar, and I'm sure all of you would be relatively happy to call it finally a day. So to summarize what we've covered today, we've covered the security groups that are attached to user roles. We've covered user roles and the creation thereof, both. We've covered users, cross-persons, employees, and their roles within the Web Central. We've covered how they need to be licensed, and of course how to create all of them. Quite importantly, we've covered how in 23.1 we can actually define all user, cross-person, and employee from one view within the defined cross-person view. We have talked about virtual private archibuses, or VPAs for short, and how they can be used either against the user or against the role to restrict data so that it's specifically viewed only by those who need to see it. So you've actually got, for example, craftspersons on one specific site or only work in one particular building. You can restrict, using VPAs, you restrict their views so that they will only ever see the work that could ever possibly apply to their building or their site that they work within. I would like to underline here during the summary again that security groups, you should never apply the percentage security group under any circumstances to roles you are creating. It should only ever exist against AFM, and even then that should be a situation where it's kept to AFM and used sparingly. And because this is the final webinar, I will of course once again be talking to you about EdgeBuild. This is the last time though, so don't worry about it. Sessions presented today will give attendees a taste of the types of topics that we will be covering during EdgeBuild training. So this is just a taster. This takes place on the 5th and 6th of July at Indigo 11 in Wokingham. Price for this training is £660 per person, but as mentioned earlier, on the completion of feedback in this webinar, you can receive a discount. This training will be focusing on enabling customers' core users to build their knowledge of the Archibus implementation. So you actually want to build it up so it's exactly what you require, then this is the sort of training you 100% want. The topics we're covering today are relevant to you and you want to look into it further. You may well benefit actually coming to the 2-day workshop where it's presented in a networking fashion. Please contact either edgenews@mass-plc.com for email or via phone on 0118 977 8560. We hope you've greatly enjoyed the webinars today. Should you have any questions or any further questions, now is the time to ask them. Is there a mass resource with some example VPA? So the simple answer is, with regards to example restrictions, we've got nothing in a documented form. Though if I talk to Andrew Taylor, Mark Little about it, I'm sure that we could come up with something that would help you. Obviously, there is a level of difficulty in it, in that it requires you actually have an understanding with XML and SQL if you are to apply it against the roles, but certainly we will happily give you examples. Is it advisable to edit the default security groups and roles or create new ones? So if you were to actually edit the backend, the default security groups, then you would probably end up stopping your system from working, as they are actually hard-coded into the application itself. So in this case, it's always going to be advisable to generate your own security groups and leave the default security groups as it is. I hope you've enjoyed the 3 webinars we've had today, and that you actually have a productive remaining time today and the rest of this week. Enjoy the bank holiday weekend, and we look forward to seeing you all in a couple of months at the EdgeBuild event. Thank you for listening.
Everyone. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, Matt.